We continue now at the top of Daf Kuftes Amud Aleph and Meseches Bava Kamma. This is Bava Kamma Daf 109a. The Mishnah continues, B'chayav uvemoso. If a father says that his son cannot get benefit from his property while he's alive or after his death, so in that situation, im meis, if the father dies, lo yirshenu, so then the son can't inherit him. It means to say the son cannot get any benefit from that property. V'yachzer lebanav o le'echav, he returns it to his sons or to his brothers, meaning all that property has to go to the other heirs of the father. And finally, the Mishnah says in this case, v'im ein lo, let's say the son has no property, he needs to inherit, he doesn't want to give it up, so then lava, what he could do is he could borrow, ubalei chov boim v'nifroim, and then if he borrows, the creditors who he borrowed from, they can come and they can collect from the property that he should have inherited. And Rashi explains, b'chayev uvemoso imeis lo yershenu, again, if the father says you can't get any benefit in his lifetime or after his death, so if the father dies, the son does not inherit him. V'im ein lo mayochal, now if the son doesn't have anything to eat, lova v'yochel, he can borrow and eat. Ubalei chov boin v'nifroim min ha'yerusha eschelko, and then the creditors can come and they can collect from his portion of the inheritance. And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Yosef says, Afilu la'arniki shel tzedakah. Let's say the person who stole from his father cannot find any heirs to his father. He still has to return the stolen item, so he would have to return it even to the purse of tzedakah, meaning even to the tzedakah collection. Rashi says, Ve'afilu la'arniki shel tzedakah im eino motzi yoresh l'aviv. If the person who stole cannot find an heir to his father, l'mi yashav, to whom to return it to, yitein osa la'arniki shel tzedakah, he needs to give it to the tzedakah collection. V'lo ya'akavenu biyadu, he can't hold it, he can't keep what he stole. And the Gemara continues, Amar Papa says, V'tzarech sheyomer, he has to say, Zeh gezel avi, this is what I stole from my father. Rashi says, V'tzarech sheyomer, Kishu meishiv la'arniki shel tzedakah, when he returns it to the tzedakah collection, he says the words, Zeh gezel abba, this is what I stole from my father. And the Gemara continues, Amai, why is this the case? Nimchale lenafshe, why can't he just forgive it to himself? This is just a general question on the Mishnah. If he himself is also an heir to his father's property, so some of that which he stole really is his, so he should just be able to forgive it, so to speak, to himself. He should just keep it, because he's the one that's really owed the money. Rashi says, V'nimchale lenafshe heicha de'en yoresh. Rashi says this question is specifically when there's no other heir, Elahu, he's the only one, V'kula shalo, so everything that he stole really is now his, because he inherited it, so why can't he just forgive it to himself? And the Gemara says, Milo Tanan, didn't we learn in the Mishnah, Machal lo ala keren, velo machal lo ala chomish. It talks about a general case of a gazlan where the nigzal forgives him for the principal and doesn't forgive him for the chomish, for the 1/5. So Alma, so we see that in general, bar mechilahu, we see that in general this is something that could be forgiven by the nigzal. So in this situation, where he himself is the heir to that which he stole, why can't he forgive it in this case? Rashi explains, Milo Tanan Macha Lo Ala Keren. Didn't we learn in the Mishnah that if the Nigzal forgives him on the principle V'lo Mekayma Mitzvah Hashava, that's a case where you're not fulfilling a mitzvah of returning it because the person forgave it. Alma Lemeipa Kidei Gezei Lo Ba'inan. So we see that you just have to fulfill in terms of the stolen item. You have to take care of that monetarily. V'nafkalei b'mechila. And if that's taken care of with forgiveness, that's enough. Hachanami here also Kaven de Yerusha Kamei Nafla, since he's the one that inherited it. Nafak Lemidei Gezela. So it's not an issue of Gezela. And so the Gemara again says, Alma bar mechil, who we see again, this is something that could be forgiven. Why can't he forgive it to himself? And the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, Lokash, it's not difficult. Har Rabbi Yossi Haglili, Har Rabbi Akiva. It's actually machlokas. This is Rabbi Yossi Haglili's opinion, and this is Rabbi Akiva's opinion, meaning there's actually a machlokas tanoim, whether forgiveness is possible at all in a case of stealing, meaning to say, is that considered to be a fulfillment of the hashava? That's a general machlokas. It applies everywhere. The Tanya, as we learned in a brisa, the pasuk says, V'im ein lo ish goel. It says again, talking about a situation where a person owes money, where a person steals. So let's say the person who he owes, he has no goel, he has no heir. Lahashiv ha'asham, he's not able to return that which he stole, that which he's guilty of. And so the brisa says, V'chiyesh adam b'Yisrael she'ein lo goel. And first of all, is there anyone in Klal Yisrael that doesn't have an heir? It can't be. It has to be that there's some kind of person to inherit. Ela begezel hager hakasam adaber. Rather, what you have to say is, this pasuk is talking specifically about stealing from a ger, stealing from a convert. That could be a situation, if the ger does not have children, that could be a situation where there are no heirs. And so again, it's saying in a situation where there are no heirs, the pasuk is going to go on to say that it goes to the Kohanim. And so the Brisa says, Hare shegazel hager, let's say he stole from a ger, v'nishbalo, and he took an oath, a false oath, v'shama shameis hager, then he heard that the ger died, v'hayamalek hasbo v'ashamol Yerushalayim. So now he's bringing his money, and he's bringing his korban asham to Yerushalayim. Again, it goes to the Kohanim in that situation. Upaga ba'oso hager but then he meets up with that ger. He heard that the ger died. It turned out the ger did not die. V'zakfu Allah b'milva. But then what happens is that the ger says, fine, we'll turn it into a loan. You owe me the money. V'meis, and then the ger dies. So zacha halo b'mesha b'yado. So then the person actually does merit. He does keep that which is in his possession. Divrei Rabbi Yossi Aglili. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yossi Aglili. And the point over here is that according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, you don't have to do a hashava in this situation. It's essentially considered like a case of mechila. So Rabbi Yossi Aglili in general would be the one to say that mechila is effective. The Mishnah earlier, which talked about the concept of the nigzal being mochel, that would be Rabbi Yossi Aglili. But Rabbi Akiva says, Ein lo takana, no, there's no solution. Achi yotzi gezelu mitachas yado, unless he gets rid of that which he stole. There has to actually be hashava. Mechila, so to speak, is not possible, and that's true in our Mishnah as well. In our Mishnah, he can't be mochelet even to himself. And the Gemara explains, Rabbi Yossi Aglili, according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, lo shna lenafshe, lo shna lacherim. It doesn't matter if it's to himself, it doesn't matter if it's to others. Motzi mochel, it's possible to be mochel. There's a concept of forgiveness in this situation. Well, Rabbi Akiva, and according to Rabbi Akiva, lo shna lacherim, lo shna lenafshe, it doesn't matter from others, it doesn't matter to himself. Lo motzi mochel, there is no concept of mechila. And the Gemara further says, Ulu Rabbi Yossi, and according to Rabbi Yossi, hu adin dafilu lo zakfa b'milva. The truth is, the halacha would be exactly the same, even if the ger didn't turn it into a loan. There still could be a concept of forgiveness, according to Rabbi Yossi. V'hai de katani zakfa ala b'milva. The only reason that we talk about a case in this bris is where he converted it into a loan. Lo diacha kochod Rabbi Akiva. That's to teach the strength of Rabbi Akiva. Diafilu zakfa ala b'milva. Even if he converted it into a loan, still there's no possibility of mechila. Ein lo takana. There's no solution. Until he gets the stolen property out of his possession. And Rashi explains, L'hashiv ha'asham, again, that's the pasuk. If there is no heir, if there's no one to inherit the person that he stole from, to return the asham, what's the asham referring to? Rashi says, Zekeren shel gazel, that refers to the principal, the actual item, the actual property that was stolen. Kiritanya l'kaman b'pirkin, like we're going to learn later on in the Bryce in our Perek. Goel means yoresh, again, the person who he stole from has no heir. And so the Brisa asks, is there anyone in Klal Yisrael without an heir? Even if he doesn't have a son or a daughter, a ach or a brother, there has to be some relative. Ad Yaakov Avinu, if you go back to Yaakov Avinu, Hakarav Yoresh, and the person who's the closest relative, the halach is, he's the one that inherits. And so the Brisa answered, Ela begezel hager, we're talking about stealing from a convert, v'nishba l'sheker, and again, the case goes on where the person takes a false oath, T'chsiv limol mal ba'ashem, it says limol mal ba'ashem, that refers to the false oath, and the point is that the ger does not have any heirs, and so then it said, v'hayamala kaspo v'ashamo l'Yerushalayim, the person is bringing his money and his asham, he's bringing it to Yerushalayim, why? La kohanim, because he's bringing it to the kohanim since there are no heirs, that's the halacha, k'dichsiv, as it's written in the pasuk, ha'asham hamushav Hashem la Kohen. It says it has to be returned to Hashem, to the Kohen. And we're going to say later on in the Sugya, as Rashi mentioned above, that the Asham refers to the Karen, it refers to the principal. And so then he meets this ger on the road. He thought that the ger had died, but then he meets the ger on the road. V'zakfu olav ger b'milva. And the ger, the convert, says, let's turn it into a loan. You owe me the money. So at that point in time, nafak le mitoras gezela no longer is considered something that's stolen. It is now considered to be a debt that is owed to the ger. Ger, and so when the ger dies, this person is actually in possession of this debt which he owes to the ger. V'zachem in hefker, so he's the one that is able to take possession from hefker. And so then we say that there's a difference now between Rabbi Yossi Aglili and Rabbi Akiva in general. And lo shna l'nafshe, according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, it doesn't matter to himself, doesn't matter to others. Always there's a possibility of mechila, meaning kegon hacha demachale haigavra gezel hager l'nafshe. In this situation of the convert, so the person is essentially being mochelet to himself. He's in possession, the ger dies, he's being mochelet to himself. V'uadin gozel esaviv, and the same would be true, like our Mishnah, if a person steals from his own father, v'nishbalo, and swears falsely to the father, umeis aviv, and the father dies, the mochel l'nafshe, so then he's the heir of his own father, and he can be mochel to himself. And v'loshna la'acherim, and the same would be true to others. According to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, there would be forgiveness, meaning nigzal legozel motzi machel, meaning a nigzal could forgive a gozel, could forgive the gazlan. Umasnisin dekatani machal lo ala karen. And so then we're going to say that earlier Mishnah, which talks about a simple case of the nigzal forgiving the gazlan, he forgives him on the karen. Rabbi Yossi Aglili, that's going to be Rabbi Yossi Aglili. V'yashminan la'acherim, and the Mishnah is teaching us there's a concept of mechila for others. V'hu adin l'nafshi, the same would be true for himself. Heicha denafik midei gezela, if it's no longer a situation of gezela, kegon yoresh o gezel Gezel Hager, for example, by an heir or by a situation of stealing from the convert, as we just said. Because Salka Daitach, and Rashi notes that right now we think Haizak fo lav dafka, that it doesn't have to even be turned into a loan. The concept of forgiveness applies even if it's not turned into a loan. Kid Mefarash Riazal, as the Gemara will explain, that's according to Rabbi Yossi Haglili. Rabbi Akiva lo shnan, according to Rabbi Akiva also, there's no such thing as mechila, and it doesn't matter to himself, it doesn't matter to others. Umasnisin dekatani meshalim karen v'chomish lebanav le'echav. So the Mishnah, our Mishnah on the previous Amud, which says that he pays the principal and the fifth to his sons, to his brothers, meaning all of the other Yarshim get it, and he gets none of it, that's Rabbi Akiva. That's Rabbi Akiva. And then the Mishnah is teaching us he can't forgive it to himself. And the same is true that you can't forgive to others. A nigzal can't forgive to a gazlan. Even if the nigzal himself would forgive it, it would not be a mechila. And the Gemara said, Hu adin afilu lo zakfan. And again, the same would be exactly true even if the ger did not convert it into a loan. Hilkach yoresh as aviv nami. Therefore, again, if somebody inherits his father also, afagav de lo zakfa ala b'milva, even though there was no conversion into a loan, v'lo yatzmi toras gezela b'chayav, if it never left the law of a gezela in the lifetime of his father, it was still considered stolen property. Kaven de meis of it, but since the father died, v'naflu nechasim lefanov machal nafshe. But since the property, again, the father died, the property fell to the son, he is able to do mechila. That's within the shita of Rabbi Yossi Haglili. Well, the Kabon Parach, the Gemara later on will ask, Im kein gezel hager denafik lekohanim hechi mashkachas. We now have a general question: when do you ever have a situation of gezel hager that is going to go to the kohanim? Why should it ever go to the kohanim? Because according to Rabbi Yossi Haglili, you have a concept of mechila. It should always go to the person himself. But the Gemara now continues and asks, Maskif lo Rav Sheshes. Rav Sheshes asks the following question on this explanation. Ihachi, if so, if this is true, that the machlokas is in all situations. Rabbi Yossi Haglili says that there's always a concept of mechila, and Rabbi Akiva says there's always not a concept of mechila. So if that's the case, Rabbi Yossi Haglili, according to Rabbi Yossi Haglili, lishminan lanafshe, on the contrary, we should teach a case where he forgives it to himself. V'chol shekein la'acherim, and then certainly it should be true that you could have forgiveness for others. That's obvious. And Rabbi Akiva, according to Rabbi Akiva also, lishminan la'acherim, we should teach a case where you're not allowed to have mechila to others, the lo matzi machal, that it's not possible to forgive, v'chol shekein lanafshe, the lo matzi machal, then certainly would be true to himself that he's not able to forgive. It wouldn't make sense to teach the cases that are at the wrong extremes. You want to teach a case where you can make an obvious kal v'chomer and extend it to the other situations. And so the Gemara says, Ella rather, Amar Rav Sheshes says, Hava ha Rav Yossi Haglili, really both Mishnayos, everything is the sheet of Rav Yossi Haglili. And what we'll say is as follows, Ki Kamma Rav Yossi Haglili de matzi machel. When did Rav Yossi Haglili say that there's a concept of mechila? La'acherim, that's if you're forgiving to others, like a case of a nigzel, forgiving to the gazlan. Avol anavshe lo matzi machel, but if he's to himself, he's not able to do the mechila. But the Gemara then asks, if that's the case, but if that's the case, why does the person take possession of what's in his hands, talking about in the situation of the Gezel Hager? In the Brisa of the Gezel Hager, apparently, we do say the person is able to forgive to himself. Here we're saying Rabbi Yossi Haglili would say, L'nafshe lo matzi machli, you can't forgive to yourself. And so the Gemara answers to that. Now we make the distinction, Misham de Zakfan Ola b'milva. The reason why in the case of the Gezel Hager, in that Brisa, Rabbi Yossi Haglili held there could be mechila, that's because it was converted from a situation of stolen property into a loan. Since there was that conversion, that's why forgiveness suddenly becomes possible. And the Gemara continues with another approach. Rava Amar, Rava says, Hava ha Rabbi Akiva, both Mishnayos are actually Rabbi Akiva. And Kiyam Rabbi Akiva de lo matzi machel, and nafshe, when did Rabbi Akiva say there's no concept of mechila? That is to oneself. Avol acher matzi machel, but to others there would be a concept of mechila, like the case of the earlier Mishnah. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Kuftes Amud Beis.